So once again, welcome to this forum. Today we have a distinguished set of panelists, Dr. Abu Rizvi, who is online from Canberra, Meena Naidu, the General Manager, Education and Participation, AIMS Australia, Professor Gary Rogers, the Dean of the School of Medicine at Deakin University, Dr. Mamta Chauhan, the Executive Director of VetAssess, and Dr. Karen Dunwoody, Director of CREATE, the Centre for Refugee Employment Advocacy, Training and Education at Deakin University. So the way we're going to run this forum this evening is for each of our panelists to speak for about 10 minutes on the key issues as they see them. There will then be an opportunity for them to engage with some of the points that have been raised by fellow panelists, and then questions from people present here today and those people online as well. So I will say, Dr. Rizvi, can you hear us okay?
Yes, I can, Mark.
Great, thank you. So I might ask you if you would like to start off with your initial comments on the topic we have before us and some of your insights from your experience as the former Deputy Secretary of Department Migration and many, many years experience in skilled migration in Australia. So over to you.
Thanks, Mark. I think the first thing we need to recognise in this space is that this is not a new problem. I recall reading reports from the Committee on Overseas Professional Qualifications, COPQ, from the 1980s, where those reports describe various obstacles to overseas skills recognition and licensing. COPQ, one of its recommendations, eventually led to the creation of the National Office for Overseas Skills Recognition, NUSA, which existed right through the 1990s. And I'm not sure when it was abolished, probably sometime in the 2000s, I imagine. It was still around when I left the Department of Immigration in 2007. And what it tried to do was be more granular in identifying where the obstacles were and developing policy proposals, including funding proposals, to start addressing the issues. So this is a problem that's been around for a very, very long time. And we have to ask ourselves, well, if it's been around for so long, why hasn't it been adequately addressed? Why are the same issues arising in 2025 that were arising in the 1980s? And I think the answer to that question is because the issue has so many different facets, there is no single obstacle to this issue, and there is no single solution to this issue. In my view, the first thing we need to think about is, well, who are the migrants that are being affected? What were the visa categories, for example, on which they entered Australia? Were they primary skilled applicants, migrants, for example? And if they were primary skilled migration applicants, did they come through the Australian education system as overseas students and become skilled migrants, or did they come directly from overseas? Secondly, we need to think about secondary applicants of skilled migrants. That is often a spouse or a dependent child who may or may not have some qualifications, and that is a large group, and we shouldn't underestimate the size of that group and how it is affected. That group is affected because they don't actually go through a skills recognition process in order to get a visa. They get their visa because they are the partners of a primary skilled applicant. We then have a third group, which are essentially humanitarian entrants and family migrants who do not go through, or are not required to go through, as part of the visa process, a skills recognition process. They may choose to go through one, but they're not required to do so. And we have to ask, how does this problem affect each of those different groups? Because I suspect it affects them quite differently. The next question I think we have to ask ourselves is, well, which are the occupations that are really creating the issues here? Which are the skills assessing bodies? And I'm not pointing fingers at anybody. Which are the skills assessing bodies where new skilled migrants, whatever category they came through, are being most negatively affected? Why are they being negatively affected? Is it the skills recognition process? Is it the requirements that are the problem? Are they inappropriate? We then have to ask ourselves, what of the funding programs and other measures we have in place, and why aren't they working? Is there a problem there? Is that the issue? And finally, I think we have to ask ourselves, is it employers' innate suspicion of overseas qualifications? Is that the problem? So I think we need to dig into this in terms of its many granular facets before we can start talking about solutions. And indeed, we have to look at the past solutions that we've tried and why they've worked or didn't work. That would be my initial thoughts on this. And I must say, there was some very good work in this space done by, I think, SSI, which identified and highlighted the extent of this problem in terms of measuring how many people are affected. But I don't think it went down into the level of depth and granularity that we need in order to start developing sensible policy solutions. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. I'll now call on Meena Naidu to come and address us. And I think your slide should be the next one line. Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mark. And I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that we're meeting on tonight here, and wherever our online people might be joining from. Of course, we're here on lands of Wurundjeri people. Pay my respects to the elders past and present. Thank you for the invitation today. I have to say, I think all of the panelists are going to be in furious agreement tonight about this, because when I was first asked if we'd be interested in doing and being on this panel, of course the answer is yes. But I really struggled to think about what was I going to say that we haven't heard before, that this is not a new issue. And in a lot of ways, I think the question is not, is there a problem? It's why have we not done anything about the problem today? Why is it still a problem? And I think that's what we're going to hear as a common theme throughout this evening. I'm going to see how well my technology skills are going okay. I'm not going to read through all my slides, but as I go through them, I want to give you some case studies to reflect on that sort of show our experience in AIMS. Now, for those of you who don't know what AIMS Australia is, we are an interesting Victorian statutory body that really has its origins in English language for migrants, but has its mission really about assisting migrants to live their best lives and integration into the Australian community. And we do that through an English language program. We do settlement and we do employment services. I've tried to think a little bit about this problem, and even though we know some of this information, I thought it's useful just to recap. So we know that there is a shortage in the health sector with GPs and other doctors. That's not new. What's interesting is the number of people who are foreign born, who are a very large percentage of the health sector. We know that engineers are in short demand, according to Engineers Australia. And again, a very high proportion of foreign born people working in that sector. Nursing, very similar, really huge shortage, and again, an area that's going to be increasingly challenging as we have our ageing demographics, and broader construction, our sort of trades environment, also a massive shortfall. And if we think about the kind of environment that we've got, renewable energy, an aging population, the major construction projects that we've got, these are all sectors that are going to have massive shortages way beyond what we are experiencing now into the next decade and beyond. So all of these sectors recognise there are critical workforce shortages. That's not new, we know that. And despite the fact that there are greater numbers of foreign-born employees, not all migrants are the same. If you're a migrant like me, who is, despite my dark complexion and Indian heritage, I was born in New Zealand. I was trained in Australia. I have a master's from Europe. I speak the language, I have the accent, and I largely, despite my colour, look and sound like most Australians. Now, if my qualification was somewhere else, was from somewhere in, say, Pakistan, if I wore a hair covering, if I had an accent, my situation would be completely different. And that is what we know, because that is what all of the studies over a very long period of time have told us, that people that come from a different environment, who are ethnically and culturally different, face a different experience. And so when we talk about foreign-born, if you're from New Zealand or the UK or a sort of a country that is more ethnically similar to an Australian environment, that is not where the problem is. The problem is the other part of our migrant community that don't have those characteristics. And what we know with that cohort is that even if they are able to segue into their chosen professional area, they'll be paid less than others who are similarly qualified. And it'll be even worse if you're a woman. So that's what we kind of know about migrant experience for skilled migrants. Their qualifications aren't always recognised. We know that. Poor English has an impact, almost as if English is somehow some sort of proxy for competency and skill. And almost half of our migrant community that come from that environment aren't working at jobs at their qualified skill level. So that's what we know. And that's our experience and aims of the migrants that come through our organisation. That's exactly what we see with people who are very qualified, who apply for hundreds of jobs and can't even get an interview. So why do we even care about this? You know, and I think this is actually part of the problem. We've got to understand why we care about this. For too long, we've thought about this as a sort of social issue. And with social issues, and I've worked in social services as well as the skills and training environment, and I've worked in more industry-based economic sectors. And what I know is that when you're in the social environment, you're going to get less funding. And it's treated in a different way. And as I often say, you know, when we're talking about the migrant community, we often talk about it as if we're doing those migrants a favour. In actual fact, they're doing us the favour because they're talent and we haven't recognised it. And that's the way that our programs are really set up. You know, we talk about helping people transition into Australia. That's our goal. But we're really trying to transition talent into Australia. And so we've got to kind of shift the debate more into that economic story. And what's really pleasing to see is that is starting to happen. It's really pleasing to see, you know, Martin Parkinson take it on through the Productivity Commission reviews and trying to create that debate there, recognising that this is about productivity. This is about an economic outcome. It's not just about supporting people from another community from another country that've had very traumatic experiences, but this is about our productivity. It's about our economic wealth and health of our community. And the maths kind of tell us all about this story. So this is a bit of a case study, again, from another one of our clients who actually took 4 years to become a registered doctor in Australia. it cost them almost, well, with their final registration fee, it did cost them over $30,000. This is someone who is qualified. So on top of being qualified, it's cost them $30,000 and 4 years to get in. And that is, and that person had to borrow money in order to get their way through. And if you compare that to the cost of a fresh student going through medical school for 6 years, the cost to government, the cost of the individual who'll be on HECS, and so is not having to pay up front. This cost is, probably the lowest cost that I could find. Many medical schools will charge you a whole lot more than that to become a doctor, because I thought it was a bit low as well. But for $30,000, we could get a fully qualified doctor into our system really, really fast. And in a shortage environment, surely that's a focus that we should want to create. And if we look at the level of qualification recognition, we can see as well, and these are CEDA numbers, that our level of qualification recognition is incredibly low. And that'll be for a lot of different reasons, including our regulatory environment, which is particularly complicated in different sectors. But this is part of the problem of how we're not able to get people into the jobs that they're qualified to do. In saying all of that, it's really important that we don't Pollyanna this, that we recognise the risks that are associated with this kind of issue and the risks of trying to bring people in to get their qualifications recognised really quickly, and some of the abuse that can happen in the system. And that's been really prevalent in my sector, in the RTO environment, the Registered Training Organisations, with ASQA taking some pretty hard actions against a number of really what I can only call dodgy RTOs, and the revocation of thousands of qualifications in critical workforce areas because there's RTO, RPL fraud going on. So, we've got to be in a situation where people aren't buying their qualifications. Very similar to, I think, what everyone else is going to talk about. We see this as a 3 pillars problem. And the reality is, unless we deal with all 3 of those pillars, we can't really make headway. So the access to gap training and qualification recognition, there's a lot of focus on that. And that is important, but it's just the beginning of the story. Because once you have your qualifications recognised, you're still not going to get a job. That is the hard reality for most people. And part of that is because you don't speak the lingo. You don't know the jargon. You don't know the cultural environment. You haven't had local work experience. These are all the barriers that come after you get your qualification. And so preparing for the local context and understanding the Australian culture and the environment is really critical to segue people into being able to participate and to be recognised. And we have programs that try to do that, that teach people how to do interviews, to help them understand language. We're starting to adopt AI as a tool to help people feed in, to learn the kind of language that might be applied in interviews. But the last part, and this is the hardest part, and this is the bit that we don't really focus in on enough, are employers. Their attitudes about international skills, but also about people, and the discrimination and bias, often unintentional, that exists. And that is just a hard reality about the access barriers. And the reality is, unless we deal with those 3 pillars, we will not get access to that talent. We will not get access to those skills. Each one of them is a barrier. So how do we go forward? Well, I guess we'll be talking about that a lot more today. Here's my initial take on it. Reducing the costs and simplifying the process for skills recognition and requalification. That's one that we tend to focus in on a lot. And yes, it's important, but it's probably just a starting point. The key bits really are about employers being more confident about the people who have come in from overseas. And probably really critically, one area that we just never really focus in on is employers looking at their recruitment practices and understanding that recruitment is a barrier. It doesn't count just to say we highly encourage people from a migrant background to apply. That does not work. Every other barrier, every other part of that process is a barrier. And we have experienced that again from employers who've come into our programs, have seen the talent and have said, if it weren't for your program, they would never have been considered, because our practice, our recruitment practice, doesn't actually allow people to get through. So that's something we really need to think about in how we support employers. And then, of course, supporting migrants with readiness training. And we do that with our skilled professional migrant program. It's a great program, but it is trying to help people one person at a time. We've had massive success in that program. In a last round, we had 13 out of 15 of our skilled participants successfully achieve employment at the end of it. But that's 13 people, and the task is much bigger than that. I will leave it at that and look forward to the continuing discussion this evening.
Now I'd like to invite Professor Gary Rogers to present. I think that's you.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Mark. Good evening, everyone. I'd also like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people as the owners of the unceded land where we are physically this evening, and pay my respects to Wurundjeri elders and extend that respect to all of the First Peoples of these lands we now call Australia. I'm going to talk specifically about medical migration this evening, and I'm going to present, I think, what might be a little bit of a counterpoint, which relates to the global ethics of medical migration, which is something that troubles me greatly. And I'll preface this by saying that what I'm about to talk about doesn't apply to refugees who are already here in Australia, whom we absolutely must find effective pathways for. But it rather points to our policy decisions about how we provide medical practitioners for our country as a country of Australia. So this information has actually already been put up a little bit this evening, which is about the fact that we believe that we have a doctor shortage in Australia, and in many ways we probably do. That's the projections in the Commonwealth's GP supply and demand study, which shows that 2028 we need about 3,900 more GPs in the country, and by 2048 that'll be more closer to 9,000. So in our current system, as it currently works, we don't have enough doctors to supply our community's needs, and our community certainly knows that and sends that message at federal elections very effectively. So we have a national medical workforce strategy that was instituted under the Morrison government in 2021. And it's quite a sizable document. It's been very well thought through, largely. Has 25 or so strategies focused on things like jurisdictional collaboration, something that we always need more of in Australia under our federal system. Talks about rebalancing supply and distribution. It's not entirely clear what that means. Reforming training pathways, certainly, and building generalist capacity. We have far too many specialists in far too niche areas in this country, which is part of the problem with our system, and increasing workforce flexibility. So the idea that medicos can move between specialties or between places of employment or sites of work. Fascinatingly, this strategy, of these 25 strategies, only one even mentions medical migration. And when you see what I'm about to show you, that is astonishing. What it says is that we should align migration and distribution levels levers across Commonwealth and jurisdictions to ensure that doctors entering the country from overseas are directed to provide services in those areas which are most in need, which is a little bit of a parenthood statement, if ever one has been written. So remember, 25 strategies, only one even talks about migration, and then in a very superficial kind of way. I think most Australians will be astonished to know what I'm about to show you. These are new doctors, newly registered doctors in Australia in the last year for which we have figures, which was 23-4. There were 3,600 Australian graduates registered that year, coming from all of the 22 medical schools. And there were twice as many doctors who qualified overseas. So 2/3 of the doctors entering our workforce today were not trained in this rich country. They were trained in other countries who probably needed them a lot more. Now, some of you will know about the Crook Report, which was commissioned in the first term of the current government, looking into the regulatory settings that are impeding doctors who are in Australia, and indeed other healthcare workers, from becoming registered. So that the main trope of our discussions this evening. The Crook Report is an interesting document. I just reread it before putting this presentation together. And again, I was surprised as I read it for a second time. It's 123 pages, 28 recommendations aimed at improving the applicant experience. Really important thing to do, absolutely. We torture doctors who are trying to get qualified and are in this country. Expanding fast-track registration pathways, so from countries like the UK and the US. Better workforce planning, gosh, yes, we certainly need that. Greater flexibility while supporting safety, so there's that notion of tension between making sure that people have the capabilities that they need to practice effectively in this country, while also trying to enable people to become registered, and enhancing the regulator performance and stewardship. Again, probably something that's a good idea. But throughout the document is a really strong overtone of Australia needing to be competitive with other wealthy countries for this commodity of doctors out from the world. As if that's what they were, and as if countries trained them and spent enormous resources in doing so when resources are scarce, shouldn't be considered at all. And I think the ethics of that are very dubious indeed. In this document, 123 pages, only half a page, an appendix of half a page, talks about ethical recruitment. And it says that Australia, this is all it says, essentially, Australia does not actively recruit healthcare workers from countries on the WHO's list that you shouldn't recruit from. Well, that's good. That's good. But that list is made up in a very interesting way. It takes into account the number of doctors per unit population in the country. That's very sound. It also, though, has another formula which takes in the extent to which that country has been judged to be reaching towards universal healthcare under the Millennial Goals. And that's much, much, much murkier. So you'll see in a moment that there are countries that have very low doctor population ratios that are not on the list. So we should consider that list to be the very extreme, the countries we absolutely must not recruit from, like Nigeria. Doesn't stop us from recruiting from a lot of countries where the ethics are very dubious. So where do they come from? And this is from that Yeoman's paper from 2020, who looked at the country of origin of international medical graduates registered in Australia in 2020. And before we look at those countries, I'll just put up Australia. And in terms of doctors per 10,000 population, our country has about 41 doctors per 10,000 population in Australia. It's not the highest in the world. Places like Norway and a couple of others are a little bit higher, but we're up there. The blue segment there, the light blue segment, the largest one, is India. And India has 7.2 doctors per 10,000 population. The next one, interestingly, is the UK. And even the UK only has 33. So arguably we're stealing from a less developed country there in some ways. Next, South Africa at 7.9. Sri Lanka at 11.4. Bangladesh at 7.2. And Bangladesh is on the list, by the way. 4% of registrants in that year came from that country from which we're not supposed to actively recruit. 6.7 for Egypt, which is the next country, the green one. And the last one that I'm going to look at is Pakistan, which is also on the list, but as you can see, has a slightly higher, I mean, it's still very low, but a slightly higher doctors per 10,000 population number, because it's the other bit of the formula that's put it on the list, the fact that it's having trouble meeting the universal health coverage, even the minimum requirements. So that's where we're at. We are a wealthy country. The WHO says rightly that we should be producing all the doctors we need. We should in fact be producing doctors for the countries that need them more. The fact that we have immigration settings that actively seek to recruit doctors from overseas, from countries especially, that need them much more than we do, is for me immoral. That doesn't for a moment mean that the doctors who are already here, especially the refugee doctors, we shouldn't treat very well and look after and bring into our workforce. That's an absolute given. But the settings that say that they're on the preferred migration list, I think that's immoral. Interested to have that discussion. Thanks.
What did you had a question for Gary? Did you want to?
Yes, I had a couple actually. The first one, if I may, Professor Rogers, they're quick questions.
Yeah, sure.
Can I please ask, Professor Rogers, in your breakup in that pie chart, that very good pie chart, very interesting pie chart, where do overseas students who do a medical degree in Australia fit in that pie chart?
These are all, this was based on the country of qualification, so they're all considered Australians for the purpose of that pie chart.
I see. So overseas students who qualify in Australia and then get skilled migration are counted as Australian students?
They are, because it's the country of their qualification. They would account for probably about 15% of those Australian medical graduates on the first chart.
Would they? Okay, that's great. Thank you. The other question I had was, in the sense that hospitals in Australia or medical practices directly recruit from overseas, they represent a very small portion of the doctors we recruit from overseas.
Yes.
That's the employer-sponsored doctors.
Yep.
They're actually a surprisingly small portion. The bulk of the overseas doctors we recruit from overseas apply through what is called an expression of interest in the Skills Select program.
Yes.
So we don't actually go out and seek them. They get onto the Immigration Department website and enter an expression of interest, and they go through that process.
Yes.
And then they get an invitation if they meet the requirements, and then they enter Australia having done that, and then it's up to them to find a job, etc.
Of course. Yep.
I guess I'm struggling with the ethics aspect of this.
Indeed.
Are you saying we should say, if you are from Nigeria and enter an expression of interest in migrating to Australia, as a doctor, we should just delete you from the
what I'm saying is that we shouldn't have medical practitioners on the desired skills list. So we shouldn't be preferentially.
So we should just take them off altogether.
Off the desired skills list, yes, we should change our own system so that we're making enough doctors for ourselves and indeed for other countries in the world. I don't believe that we should be preferentially inviting doctors from countries that have spent considerable resources to train them for their own workforce. Right. I don't believe that we should be inviting them to migrate to Australia. Now, as I say, in refugee circumstances, it's very different. But
yeah, they're just included on a list of occupations. They're not.
That's right.
Preferential in any way. They're just included on a list of occupations.
I think we should derive that list of occupations with regard to the global workforce situation, not our selfish Australian view, which is what we do now.
So should we treat nurses, engineers, architects the same way too, and remove all of them?
I think there is an argument to be made for that.
Wow. Okay.
We can continue that discussion in a moment. Thank you. I'd now like to invite Dr. Mamta Chauhan to present her comments. I think you have slides now.
Yeah.
They're probably the
will be
next,
quick,
the
yeah.
next one.
All right. This one?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Hi, everyone. And I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting today. Pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I was welcomed into this country back in 2007 and very, very grateful for Australia for making me and giving me a place to make my home as well. I represent Veritas and Abul Rizvi in his opening comments did talk about skills assessment. That's going to be an important part of the conversation that's going to happen today. So I represent one of the 40 plus assessing authorities here today that support the skill migration program through skills assessment processes. But just to clarify, what are the occupations that Veritas are under Veritas scope? We have certain trades and we have professional occupations. But we're not a peak body representing those occupations. So we do not set the regulatory or licensing standards for any of those occupations. These occupations are the ones that do not necessarily have a licensing requirement. So we will be engaging with industries to align our criteria to their requirements as well. There are 350 plus, but we don't do engineers, we don't do nurses, we don't do doctors, but we do other professional occupations. We do a lot in the business and finance. We also do a lot in agriculture, science as well, and some of the allied health professionals too. In the trades, we are an assessment body for Trades Recognition Australia. And in this space, it does get interesting. We do undertake or provide skills assessment for a few licensed trades, but we do not do the licensing for those occupations. So I guess that's part of the discussion that's going to happen today, because that's some of the challenges that we hear often from applicants who've passed a skills assessment for certain occupations, which enables them to get a visa to Australia, but not necessarily gives them a license to work in that trade in Australia as well. So that's the electricians, the plumbers, and the aircon refrigeration mechanics. And there are lots of other trades that we assess for: cooks, chefs, bricklayers. Well, there are two pilots that we significantly worked on. Now, the issues and challenges, I think they've already been highlighted by Dr. Rizvi. Mina, you also talked about that, and Professor Gary did, focusing on the health or the medical professions. I guess, based on my work experience and my life experience, what I'll only add to that, and nuance that, Mina, you touched on, is that it is a cultural change for migrants when they come into this country, especially if they come from a non-English speaking background. If they are coming from a developing nation, there is a level of anxiety, uncertainty. You're still lost in the world that you have left behind, and still getting used to and understanding, processing the new world that you have come into. The migrants come with wealth of capabilities and expertise. Now, that's a different discussion, whether it's clearly matched to an Australian standard, are they job ready or not, and that'll be part of the discussions we'll have today. But there is a wealth of capability and expertise, and they want to put it to very good use. They want to do good for themselves when they come to this country as a migrant. They often need a nudge. They often need someone to provide them that hand-holding support. Lots of organizations like AIMS, like Spectrum, the settlement services, as well as, the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre, all these organizations are increasing their profile in that post-settlement space. But what we often hear is there is still no one-stop shop information for migrants when they land into Australia. Where do I go to get a hand-to-hand holding or end-to-end information or some sort of support to go through the process? Now that I've landed in Australia, where do I go to navigate through, the industry sector or the professional sector that I've got all my skills and expertise in? Some initiatives that we as an assessment body are trying to do on our own accord is, if individuals are coming through our processes, we are talking to the industries when we align the criteria. And we're saying, is there a way that we can introduce those potential migrants? We don't know when they will get a visa. So that's another part of the story as well, is you pass through different stages of the assessment and then you sit in a queue. You don't know when exactly you're going to get a visa. Is it 1 year? Is it 6 months? Is it 3 or 4 years? But we are trying to introduce them to industries beforehand and saying, when they land into Australia, when they get a visa to be in Australia, would you be willing to actually help them navigate through the industry sector introduce them to the employer. So it's a start. It's a start in that process. We have 350 plus occupations under our scope. And we are increasingly getting more and more industries on board with that concept as well. But that's one of the biggest problems that migrants face. We often hear that Canada has a very good settlement program, post-migration settlement program. Now, this is not to say that Canada's system is overall perfect. We hear about the issues and challenges there, but there are some good lessons to learn, as there are some good lessons to learn from the Australian migration program as well for other countries, which we hear from the UK and Germany as well. But Canada has invested at a federal government level in the post-settlement service support system for migrants. When migrants come into the country, there is a one place where they go to get a determination of where they fit, where the gaps are. If they need upskilling and training, they will be redirected to industries or to training providers to get those, to fill those gaps as well. And then there is an employment support as well. Again, I'm not saying that that system works perfect. If it was, then we wouldn't have the issues and challenges as we are hearing with other migration programs across the country today. But there are lessons to be learned. There is a lot of knowledge exchange to be learned. Which countries are doing it better in terms of migration? What can we adopt as well? So I guess that's one of the things that we have been advocating on and we are increasingly, engaging with institutions like AIMS and with ASRC as well to see how we do come together. The other thing I'd probably say is the refugees. And of course, Dr. Karen, you're going to talk about that. That brings me to these pilots as well that we worked on. The pilots were aimed, they were federal government supported pilots, and they were aimed at supporting, one of the pilots was aimed for refugees and helping them go through a skills assessment process that was funded by the government and then enable them connect to employers as well. There is a study that's available online as well. It's called the Deloitte report on the three pilots, in fact, for skills assessment. And there are some stats in there to suggest that there was success. There was some success that was achieved through those pilots as well. So I guess now the advocacy point for us and for all other assessing authorities is, if that pilot works, why not turn it into a BAU? Why not just make it a program in itself? So yeah, I'll probably stop on that note here, and there'll be a lot more to add to the discussions. Thank you. Thanks.
I'd like to ask Dr. Karen Dunwoody to come to. There we go.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Oh, it's very small. I'm going to need my reading glasses, I think. I too would like to pay my respects to the Wurundjeri people on whose land we meet this evening, and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. Good evening, and thank you very much for the opportunity to come and speak to you. I am going to be spending a little bit of time this evening just talking about some work that we've been doing here at the Centre at Deakin University, the Centre for Refugee Employment, Advocacy, Training and Education. We were founded 6 years ago. And I'm the director, and two of my colleagues join me this evening, Biz Hakimi and Anna Xavier in the back of the room, who work very, very closely with me in supporting people from refugee backgrounds, and now we're certainly working with people from migrant backgrounds coming into Australia who are highly qualified and finding they are being funneled into low-skilled jobs. Why did I get into this space? I haven't always been in academia, and this is a quote that really, I suppose, was a catalyst for me to move into this sector. I was volunteering at a refugee women's and children's group back in 2015, and there was a young woman there. She was about 28 years of age. She was from Afghanistan. She was a single mother. She had worked in Afghanistan. She was highly qualified. She'd made her way to Australia on a boat on her own, and she was 6 months pregnant. And I said to her, I was talking to her, and I asked her about her background and what she wanted to do. And she said to me, in the 5 years since I've left my country, you're the first person to ask me who I am, what I would like to do, And just because I have sought asylum, it doesn't mean I'm worthless. Now, that would resonate with some people in the room who've worked in the refugee sector. And I thought about that, and I thought about all the other women in the room. There's probably about another 40 women in the room. We were sitting outside when I was talking to Galzar. And I just went around and spoke to those women, and I met doctors, and I met lawyers, and I met academics, and I met engineers who were all seeking work. And they hadn't had their qualifications recognised. They were working with their case managers and being told that they could go and work in a supermarket, they could go and work in a factory because it's going to cost too much money and too much time to be requalified or have your qualifications recognised. And by the way, you're on a temporary protection visa and you don't know whether you're going to get permanent protection, and that tends to frighten employers when it comes to putting you into a meaningful and decent job, that the chances are you may be sent home. So why should I employ you? Here's two doctors, and we heard Gary talking about the doctors, particularly those coming in from overseas. Here's two doctors here that came through our program at Deakin Create, Idris and Faisal. They came from Afghanistan in 2021 at the fall of Kabul. Idris was an oncologist, and Faisal had worked at the front line as a surgeon in the Afghan conflict. Idris, who was qualified in Turkey, who was an oncologist, was told by his case manager to go to Workforce Australia to find a job. Workforce Australia told him he can get a job in a factory, or he could go and sweep the floor in Dandenong Market after it closed. There were the two jobs available to him. No thought whatsoever about his qualifications, transferable skills, or even any advice on how he could go about getting requalified. Zero, nothing, not even a website. Here's where you go to find out from APRA, AMA, the AMC, on where, how and where you can get requalified. Faisal was told by his case manager to take his qualifications off his CV so he can get a job at a chemist in Dandenong as a pharmacy assistant. Now, where in any of this is the justification for settlement agencies, employment services? What right do they have to say to these people, you're good enough to come to this country, but you're not good enough to be employed in a meaningful and decent employment? And this happens consistently, because we don't have the resources or the knowledge in the system to enable us to get people who are coming to Australia on humanitarian visas into decent and meaningful employment in this country, which is why we set up our centre and we do what we do. And by the way, Idris's wife joined him about 12 months ago. She was an oncologist, not an oncologist, sorry, a gynecologist and an obstetrician. Worked 8 years with Médecins Sans Frontières, where she spoke English in the hospital she was working at in Afghanistan. And I think the record number of births she had in her hospital, she was the only doctor in her hospital on duty for a 48-hour period with 4 nurses to assist her, giving birth to 45 babies. When she arrived in Australia, her case manager said to her, practice your English. There's a job going at the local supermarket. Idris and Faisal are now working at Peninsula Health because I worked with the CEO of Peninsula Health to get them jobs as clinical assistants. Idris has now passed, no, they're both now passed their AMC exams, and they're both still working at that hospital, and they're ready for their practical exams. If we had not intervened, we'd have 2 doctors working at factories here in Melbourne. Now, we need to find a better way because this system is broken. It has been broken for many, many years. Since the since we signed the Refugee Convention in 1951 with humanitarian migrants. Nothing has changed. Are we importing skills to fix holes in broken systems? Why do we continue to treat migrants and refugees as a homogenous group? Why do we group them all in? Why do we all put them in a room like this and say to them, this is how you write a resume? Go to seek.com and apply for a job. The one thing that migrants and refugees don't have when they arrive in Australia is social capital. They do not have a network. And research tells us 70% of jobs are found through networking in this country, not through applying online. So that's redundant to have them all in the room to do, this is how you get a job in Australia. It does not work. And why do we continue to do it? Where is the will for genuine collaboration to fix this? Governments, providers, employers, and universities. And when I talk about collaboration, I mean sharing the skills, sharing the knowledge, and sharing the resources. So we get referrals into our program, which we provide free for refugees, career clinics, from 30 different points and agencies. We receive zero funding from government and we receive zero funding from those referral agencies. Yet they say, we collaborate with you because we refer our clients into you. Because we know how to work with refugees to get them into meaningful employment, highly qualified, because the resources are very, very scarce out there. Why are agencies and providers continually feeling pressured to find any job for their clients just to meet their KPIs? Do we have a shortage of skills or a shortage of imagination on how to use them? What about the transferable skills all these people come with? And where are all the skilled and qualified employment careers counsellors and case managers? In my whole time in working in this sector, I've never come across one. Not one. Who works with refugees to get them into, who's qualified and skilled, I'm talking, not just case managers, but employment case managers who are highly qualified that do the job, who are employed to do that. There's plenty out there, but they're not employed in the sector. There's a global talent shortage. Why are we not looking at best practice globally? And that point's already been, brought up this evening. Why are skills recognition? Why is skills recognition treated as a privilege instead of a priority? So it's a privilege to have your skills recognised. And is the migration system designed to retain talent or just extract it? So we'll take what we want from you and we'll get rid of the rest. So these are the key questions that we are confronted with consistently in this sector. Australia must shift from migration as a numbers game to a migration as a capability strategy. So stop looking at the numbers. We must have clear pathways to permanent residency and citizenship. Sitting for 12 years on a temporary protection visa does nothing for your career. Work on a better system for skills recognition, language acquisition, and employment inclusion. Inclusion is the term there. Employment inclusion, a sense of belonging. Introduce measures to address employer bias and improve credential recognition. People talk about unconscious bias. There's no such thing as unconscious bias. All bias is conscious. Create a system that values migrants' future potential, not just current job readiness. Look at what they can contribute to this country in the long term, not just what's convenient for us at the moment, and for employment agencies to be putting people into factory jobs or sweeping floors at Dandenong Market when they're qualified medical practitioners. We need to ensure providers, employment providers, agencies are accountable, that they do report on their on their employment outcomes. Not just we got 30 people a job. What sort of job did you get them? Did it match their skills? Was it decent? Was it meaningful? And stop importing skills to fix holes in broken systems. Be strategic, as I pointed out earlier. Fix the skills recognition system by working with professional bodies and accrediting agencies. Some work that we're currently doing at Deakin Create is around the accreditation of refugee doctors. And there is nowhere in Australia where we can find out how many refugee doctors are that exist here in Australia. We know we have many, 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 because many have been through our program. So we've got some funding, philanthropic funding, to actually do that work and work on recognising refugee doctors here in Australia. If the UK can do it, they have got a specific program. My colleague, Gabrielle Wolfe, and my other colleague, Neville Yeomans from Melbourne University, are working on a project as we speak around gathering that data and looking at the possibility of having a similar system here in Australia. And it's something certainly that we'd like to talk to Gary a bit more about, particularly since we're both at the same university. And recognise that every individual for who they are, and ensure they're given every single opportunity to engage in meaningful and decent employment. Meaningful and decent employment, not a job. After all, it's a human right, and we forget that. Thank you.
Before in the room, if you'd like to come and sit down the front, and we've got some microphones here, which we can turn. Does that work? So see the little. I'll give one to you, and I'll give one to the other end too. So we, I know. So we have some questions in the audience. I know Abul also has a couple of questions as well, and so the panelists might like to also just initially, if there are any issues which you'd like to raise, in addition to the other points that you raised in those discussions. I know Abul has a couple of questions with that in terms of our other panelists here. Any other questions you have of your fellow panelists at this point you'd like to raise? Or any points? Yes.
I'll probably just.
Here's a microphone. Yeah.
I found your information interesting and not at all surprising, to be honest. I think the reality is, and it's easy to see anywhere on the internet, that you're absolutely right. Australia is seen as a wealthy country, and it is depicted that way by agents in those countries, in India, and particularly India, where there is a examination of the costs of coming to Australia as an international student versus studying in India and moving over. So from the beginning, before you even start studying, there is an exploration by agents of that whole process, recognizing that when you come and the relative prices, the relative incomes, all of that comes through. So it doesn't at all surprise me that there are people from other countries who are targeting Australia as a place to come. I appreciate your point about the ethics and morality of it. I guess I'd also suggest that as individuals who wish to have their best life, they also get to exercise agency about where they can best achieve that. And to that extent, to sort of say, you should stay in your own country because they need you more than we do, is also very challenging from a sort of ethical, moral perspective, because that's almost not quite colonialistic kind of and sort of perspective, but it is dictating someone else's future and removing their own agency. So that's probably the challenge that I have with that sort of perspective.
Very glad to.
Yes, very happy to. Absolutely agree. I think that is the moral dilemma. I guess the standpoint I wanted to emphasize was that of the World Health Organization as it looks at the health of the world, and it recognizes these highly dubious practices that wealthy countries are engaging in when they're trying to bring the whole world to universal health coverage. And there are countries that are much less well off than ours that are making real efforts to do that. Kenya has doubled the number of doctors it makes in the last 5 years, I believe. And a lot of them are going elsewhere. And that moral dilemma, I think, is very, very real and very difficult. For a country like Australia, I think it's about our policy settings and their intent. I think when people come to Australia for humanitarian reasons, I would absolutely say we should do everything that you've all been talking about. And I'd love to be part of that as a medical school. But I think when our federal government's policy position is that we've got a huge shortage because our health system is built like this, so we'll import twice as many doctors as we make, that's really, really troubling to me. There are many, many more applicants for places in Australian medical schools than there are places, by tenfold or more. And they're just the advantaged ones, right? Because if you look at the demographics of medical students in Australia and you look at their socioeconomic decile, it goes like that. Okay, so we're making real efforts to recruit more broadly from the Australian population, and indeed people from refugee families are one of the groups that we would love to recruit more because they're very underrepresented in Australian domestic medical training. Likewise, people from our socioeconomic groups, from LGBTQI backgrounds, people with disabilities. So that's the other side of it. But I thought that kind of counterpoint was really important for us to make. I am a migrant myself, as it happens, albeit from the UK. But I arrived here when I was 12, and so I know a little bit, a very tiny bit of what the migrant experience is about. And I absolutely agree that people who are coming here and find themselves here for humanitarian reasons or however they get here, we absolutely must treat them very decently and make best use of their capabilities because they're here. The problem for me are the policy settings.
Thank you. Now, I know Abul had a question for Karen, I think.
Yes, if I may.
Yes.
I was interested in the advice that those two doctors got from the settlement service officers they were working with. And I'm really surprised that they weren't given some advice, at least, about skills recognition and the pathways for that. And if they weren't, would there have been merit, or did you ask the CEO of that organisation, is that their policy not to give that advice?
I have had a meeting, several meetings with CEOs for settlement agencies over the time, and I think I rattle a few chains, unfortunately or fortunately. This is very common practice, actually, Abul. We've had probably contact with over 1,000 people through our program. We had, over the period of time, we've had many hundreds of people coming through our career clinics who come to us because they say our program works for them. And the advice that, and you've got to think about, most of the agencies are very, very understaffed and overworked. So if you've got a caseload of 250 people, you can't sit down with 250 people or 150 people or even, 80 people and give them career advice. Finding somebody meaningful and decent employment when they're highly qualified takes a qualified careers counsellor time, not a case worker who may have, not necessarily, social work background. They do not have the industry connections, nor do they have the knowledge of even where to go, what site to go for doctors to find out what the pathway is. And that's another thing that we're doing with our funding, is creating a very, very simple model with APRA on the pathways to becoming a doctor. And Gary's nodding here because even the IMGs that come in find it very difficult to follow that pathway, let alone somebody whose English language skills are their fourth or fifth language, and they can't navigate that. Is very, very difficult. I find it incredibly difficult to navigate.
So when you talk to the CEOs of these settlement services organisations, is that what they say? We don't have the resources to help?
That's right. Don't have the resources. And working with Workforce Australia, that's been outsourced, as you know.
Well, they've both been outsourced.
Yes, yeah,
they both used to be within government.
Absolutely. So, of course, you've got people in there that need to make money, haven't you? So you've got people there who cut costs, and they employ people that aren't qualified. So you can employ somebody in at Workforce Australia for $50,000 or $60,000 a year. If you want to get in a qualified employment counsellor in there, you're paying $100,000, $110,000 a year. So what are you going to do when you're running an organisation that needs to be, needs to make money?
Well, that's pretty sad to hear that the CEOs of these organisations say we don't have the money to help these people, and so we just shove them off to Workforce Australia.
Yes, but also, I mean, they're fortunate enough to have a Workforce Australia office anywhere near them. If you're in a regional area, that may not be the case. Go and work in an abattoir.
Yes, thanks. I have a question here.
Hi. Yeah, I have a question for Gary and for Abdul as well. I'm very pleased you raised the issue of ethical recruitment. And my comments based on my experience. I worked 4 years. 4 years I worked as a research head for James Cook University's UDRH in Mount Isa.
Oh, yes.
And as you know, the UDRH, they were set up to address the health workforce issues in rural and remote areas.
Yes.
And we work closely with the hospitals and other health services. What really struck me was the majority, around 99% doctors were Indian origin.
Yes.
And coming from India, and I work on migration, primary health care, and all that. In India, the best doctors come from All India Institute of Medical Sciences. That is heavily subsidized by the government of India.
Yes.
Getting admission is very difficult there, but getting a degree is not very expensive. And these are the doctors who leave the country to work abroad.
Exactly.
And WHO has described India as the chronic shortage of healthcare workers.
Yes.
But if you see whether US, UK, Australia, they make a significant part of healthcare workforce. And when I talked to the doctors in Mount Isa, they said that there is a pathway which I was not aware of, that you don't have to undergo all the tests. If you work in rural remote area for a certain period of time, 6 to 7 years, then you're qualified to practice in an urban area. So they all are waiting for, spend that particular amount of time and then go back. Yes. So it's basically not resolving the issue. So this made me think about some international level of some treaty or whatever, the ethics issue, because to me, Indian doctors are subsidizing the healthcare system of these countries. But what Indian government gets in return? I mean, again, there is a right question. I have the right to go and move. We can't stop. Whether should it be done at the country level? When the student, they get admission in the premium institutes, that you cannot go, you have to serve certain years in the country or whatever. But yeah, this was my main question before I go to Abdul.
I absolutely,
it was a long one.
Absolutely agree with everything you've just said, basically. Just for the benefit of the audience, UDRH is a University Department of Rural Health. It's a Commonwealth program that supports the training of healthcare workers in rural areas. We have one of our own. Many of the medical schools do. No, I absolutely agree with you. I think there is, of course, a WHO or a World Health Assembly resolution that says that that it's very detailed, and I have to say it's very weasel wordy, as such things often are, because they have to get passed by a majority of the World Health Assembly. But the principles are there, and the members of the World Health Assembly have signed up to it. So the international agreement is there. It's just that we have policy settings that aren't abiding by it. That's the problem. Absolutely agree with you.
If I can just, I guess, expand this into a sort of broader context outside of just doctors. This isn't just limited to doctors. We are also stripping out teachers from other countries. You know, from my home country in New Zealand, Australia targets Kiwis to come into Australia across all spectrums because of their qualification alignment. You know, so New Zealand would have a shortage. We hit Southeast Asian countries for the care economy. So this is not limited to one sector, and I appreciate it's a problem that we have across a vast bulk of our sectors. I've done a lot of work in renewable energy, and every country is trying to move forward in that space. And so there's a global shortage of the skills, talent that we need in that environment, and we're all competing. And you know, I guess to sort of narrow us down to one particular profession, when this isn't limited to just one profession, this is a global issue where that every country is experiencing. Everyone is playing in the global market for workforce and a global shortage of workforce. I think we have to recognise that rather than just isolating one part. And every country has to deal with how they're supporting their graduates and how they're incentivising them to stay and how they're creating opportunities for them in those countries. But I think it would be, in the context of this broader conversation, really limiting to just think about it in the context of doctors.
Thank you.
I will be very quick.
Certainly, yeah.
Go ahead. Other can go ahead.
Well, we have a question online from Fetty. Fetty, would you like to ask your question?
Thank you, Mark. Let me just switch my... I raised my hand and then I lowered it a few times because I thought my battery is running so low, I might lose connection. I just want to say, look, as the director of the ADI, really enjoyed this discussion, and some of you might know that we have led maybe 10 months ago, we have led a massive submission, an IRC Center of Excellence on migration systems and futures in Australia, and we engaged very robustly with the migration systems review that many of you might be aware of. And what I wanted to say is the discussions tonight, which are focused on perhaps one dimension of the migration debate, and that is how should we handle, what do we do with migrants, highly qualified migrants who are facing significant challenges in terms of getting their qualifications recognized and therefore doing what we think are capable of doing and contributing to Australia. But the broader picture, and this is probably the only comment I want to make, the broader picture is that we really, as a society, have lost the plot on good policy making around migration. We do not have a fit-for-purpose migration policy. Our migration streams and programs that we have been using are completely out of date, and I'm sure Abul knows a lot of that. We haven't really worked to modernize and bring it up to scratch in the similar manner that a lot of competing, if you like, destination countries have done recently. And just to give you a bit of anecdotal evidence that some of you might or might not know, that because specifically the lack of recognition of qualifications for many highly qualified migrants that we attracted to Australia, in particular from India, but other places, we have seen over the last few years a new phenomenon, which is that people are coming to Australia's first destination, they apply and they get the visa, they try to settle here. After a number of years of not getting their qualifications recognized, they pack up and move on. So we've seen, and I'm sure the figures have changed, but some of you might have the figures. 18 months ago, it's been documented about 30,000 migrants who came here, highly skilled migrants, engineers and doctors and what have you, and they ended up leaving Australia over a couple of years and moving to other places. In particular, Canada was attracting them for two reasons. One is that qualifications, lack of recognition, and the other big challenge is that we are not facilitating family reunion in the same way that other destinations are doing. So people come here, but they find it extremely difficult to bring parents or to bring family members who they left behind. So for those two reasons alone, we are really facing significant challenges in terms of not only attracting, but also keeping those highly qualified migrants that even managed to come here. So I just wanted to just share those few things, kind of observations with you, but to also say thank you all for really conducting such a stimulating and fascinating conversation. And I've been following it with a lot of attention and with a great interest. So maybe that's a comment or a question. Perhaps Abul knows a little bit more about the numbers.
Abul, would you like to reflect on Fethi's comments?
Yes, I would actually. Look, immigration policy and immigration policy settings, visa design can always be improved. You never reach perfection in that, and we are far, far short of perfection. Having said that, the argument that we are unable to attract highly skilled migrants is simply wrong. At the moment, the Australian government is unable to announce a migration program for 25-26 because the level of demand is so high that it does not know how to design a program that will be legally and politically acceptable. As you're aware, the last election involved an argument about how much migration could be cut. It's in that context that the Australian government is currently struggling to announce a migration program for 25-26. The fact that it has not announced a program before the program year started is completely unprecedented, never happened before. So the idea that we are not able to attract skilled migrants is simply wrong.
Okay. Yes.
I'll probably just add a point on the qualification recognition, Fethi, that you raised, that I'm not sure if you're aware, and whether if we're talking about recognition of overseas qualifications for alignment to the Australian framework, or is it recognition of their overseas credentials by employers or industries? If it's a comparability, there is a federal government and there are state government programs that offer service which are accessible by migrants, whether they're primary applicants or secondary. They came here on a family visa and haven't had a process of skills recognition, so they can get their credentials recognized and get an AQF comparative, but it is a paid service. Yeah, but it is available. Yeah, and it's publicly available. But I think it goes back to my earlier point is if there's no one to tell the migrant when they come into the country that this is a service that is available to you and you are able to access it, there's missed opportunities, like you said before in the examples you shared.
Yeah.
Yes.
Abul, I think, sorry, just
Yes,
quick
certainly, Fethi.
reaction to Abul's. No, look, there are, of course, migrants who want to come all the time.
And highly skilled migrants. Let's not be unclear about that. It's the skill stream that is also massively oversubscribed.
Yeah.
We'll let Fethi respond. Yeah.
Sorry. Just want to say. So it's the challenge is twofold. One is we know that this is it's a sector by sector issue. It's not really we can't say it's a situation consistent across all sectors, depending on what kind of sectors we are dealing with. Health care workers and health professionals is different from IT and engineers and builders and carpenters and what have you. But it is also, Abula, it is absolutely beyond any doubt, and we've done the research on this, that we are losing the competitive edge. We are definitely losing. You know that countries, even in Asia, your Japans, your South Koreas, countries in the Middle East, your UAEs and Qatar's, countries in Europe, your Germany, and all of them are competing for the kind of migrants that we would like to attract to Australia. So maybe we are not going to fail to meet our targets in the short to medium term, but we cannot really take it for granted that the situation here is so good in terms of receiving and settling and recognizing the skills of migrants that people will just continue to want to come to Australia no matter what. And as I said, there has been actually reports in the media and the ABC, SBS on migrants who came to Australia highly skilled and left. And we interviewed some of them, Abul. and we asked them why we were leaving, and they indicated for those two reasons: lack of proper integration in the labor market, and no pathway for family reunion. But not no pathway, there's a pathway, but it's so far ahead, like we're talking 5, 10, 15 years in some cases. So they decided to move on. So we have to be very careful about the language we use.
No, and I agree, and I think relying on anecdotes in this space is not really research. I think we ought to avoid relying on just anecdotes. Yes, in the future, things may become more difficult as more and more countries, particularly the countries that you named, and probably most significantly China, become much bigger players in the skilled migration game. They will be heavily competitive, and we need to be conscious of that. And I'll be the last to suggest that our system is perfect or that it can't be improved. It needs to be desperately improved. Absolutely. I've been critical of a number of policy settings of the government in recent years. That's absolutely true. But the idea that we are struggling to attract skilled migrants just does not stand up, and retain skilled migrants just does not stand up.
No. We're
in the
not
face
yet,
of the data.
We are not
let me
yet
finish,
struggling.
please.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
Let me finish, please.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. In the last 12 to 18 months, we attracted more skilled migrants from New Zealand than we have ever before in our history. And that was not through any promotion or any action of the government. It was simply because our labour market was so much stronger than New Zealand's that we attracted huge numbers.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we have actually
New Zealand being, going through a recession, so yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think we have actually, I know for a fact that maybe not at the federal level, but definitely at the state level, that there is an active program of targeting Kiwis because they don't have to go through skilled migration. They
Kira, are you there? Kira. So, Abul, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
And you can hear, but we can't hear. Oh, okay.
I don't know what's happened.
That's bizarre. Yeah, I think it's this. Everyone is having the same problem here.
Labor market or some lobbying industry. I always wondered, I tried to find this information, I could not find. And then how the shortage being measured? Do we measure at the right level details like occupation, region, or skill types? Or we just rely on national level, shortages? And the third one is, are our skill list, skill occupation list, which keep changing, on a periodical basis, based on timely evidence, or are they outdated by the time they're implemented? because by the time people apply this, that, and then because whether if we do it at the national level, but the shortages are in the region or regional level or remote areas, but then why migrants, when they come under those skill shortages, we can't make them go there. I don't know, there is a mismatch. So yeah, thank you.
Bo, can you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look, I'll take the last one first, but you'll have to help me remember the ones that were earlier. But the last one, there are different visa categories that are designed in different ways that deal with locality, occupation targeting, and those sorts of things. So a category such as the state territory nominated visa targets more geography and then skill. So if you're nominated by New South Wales will determine who they will nominate based on what New South Wales needs are. And New South Wales then divides up New South Wales into, I think, 14 different sub-regions, and it determines the needs of each region differently. So, for example, the Hunter may have different needs to, say, the Illawarra or Orange or wherever. So that works differently. Employer-sponsored visas are really not determined by the skills list so much, but determined by the employer and what they need. The only category where national level skills targeting applies is the skilled independent category, which was cut in half last year, and in 25-26 will probably be massively cut again. So it's the least targeted visa because it's at a national level. So we do divide up by geography and by needs.
That's the majority one. The skilled occupation list one. That's the majority of.
No, that's not true.
No, okay.
That's not true. The skilled independent category has in some years been very large, but it was cut significantly in 24-25, and it will barely exist in 25-26.
Thank you. We're now close to the end of our time, and I might just ask our panelists here if you have any closing additional comments that you'd like to make. Karen.
Oh, thank you. I think I'd just like to touch on that point when we've concentrated a lot this evening on the skilled migration coming into Australia. And I think we need to really focus. I mean, Gary and I had a conversation before coming in around the people that are here now, that have come in on various visa types, particularly in fields like medicine and the health sector, many people in the health sector, engineers, academics. We've got people coming through our program, museum curators, architects, archaeologists, people qualified in just about every field that you can think of coming through that are being funneled into low-skilled jobs. They're underemployed in this country, and there is very little opportunity for them to get their qualifications recognised, to get access to the tertiary system. Also, financially, we've talked this evening about skills recognition. It costs money. People who are coming in as refugees and on certain visa types don't have the resources or the funding to be able to do this. They have to go out there and get work, and there's no support and there's no funding and resources being put into this. That's either human resources or anything to change the system, as I said, since the Refugee Convention was signed. So we're basically doing the same thing over and over again. If you keep a system broken, it keeps getting funded. You keep a system broken, it keeps getting funded. Why don't we want to fix the system for humanitarian migrants coming in here who are highly skilled? I don't have an answer to that, but I can probably make a guess.
Thank you. Yes.
I guess a couple of closing, I guess, comments. Firstly, there isn't one single solution. We really do need to address this collectively, and I note that in the recent campaigns that are focusing on this, there are a lot of industry groups that are really pushing hard for government change, but they also need to look in the mirror They need to look at what they are doing themselves to facilitate. It's not just a government problem. Government is absolutely part of the solution, but so is industry and so are employers. And so often you hear about industry complaining about government not supporting, not doing things. They also need to come to the party and look at their employers and their industry groups to create the jobs, to remove the barriers that actually allow people to be recruited. And the rest of the support systems, which are outside of the formal, it's more than just learning English. I agree with you completely. There are other things that we need to do to support people to be positioned to be ready to go into these roles and to be able to be effective and successful. Set them up for success, not for failure. That's what we've really got to do. So it's a holistic approach, and each sector is different. And I guess I just remind people, just building on this point about the cost, one of my board members who's from the Victorian Multicultural Commission has spoken about this point often, about the number of nurses that we have qualified in Victoria who are not able to get registered through APRA, primarily because they can't afford the fee to do the English language test as a first step. Now, for you and I, something that costs $700 might not seem like much, but for people who have to feed their families and pay exorbitant rent and maybe came with nothing from an incredibly low income country, it is a fortune. And so we're actively creating disincentives to tap into the skills and talent that people have. And that's the sort of thing that we really need to understand. We need to come from that lens rather than just thinking about it as a process that people can just get through.
Gary.
There's certainly a great deal that we could do to improve in the medical field, to improve the pathway for overseas trained doctors who are already here. I'm examined for the Australian Medical Council for international medical graduates, and the sad truth for your two doctors going for that practical exam is their pass rate will be 21%. There are alternative ways of assessing that are starting to be trialled in practice, because these people are often very specialised. So they're examined at the level of the graduating medical student, which is generic. It's not in the specialty, it's everything. There are other ways of recognising that capability in a workplace-based way, where the success rates are up in the 90s. So we've got a lot to do in that space. In the space in relation to our sovereign production of medical graduates versus our importation from the rest of the world, though, you saw in that diagram I showed 6,000 or so new registrants from overseas last year. In the election campaign we've just been through, how many new places in medicine were offered? 150. Wow. Medical Deans Australia and New Zealand has suggested that we need at least 1,000 more domestic medical places in Australia, and probably more than that. We've got a lot to do in that space too.
I guess I'll probably conclude by saying that migration, and not only Australian migration all across, it's an evolving, ever-evolving, emerging landscape. And I do agree with Dr. Rizvi that Australia is increasingly becoming a more and more popular destination. Now, there may be challenges when people arrive here, but still, from an outsider, a person who's looking for a better country or in the hope of making a better life, Australia is still a sought-after destination. That's what we're experiencing as a skills assessment body as well. So I guess the opportunity here is, as it is an evolving space, there will be new issues and challenges coming up as we see new emerging nuances within this landscape. Wherever you find an opportunity to step in and do something good and achieve a great outcome, go for it. Whatever we can do now, and collaboration. Nina absolutely was right, spot on. It's a collaboration. It's not a one agency can solve all the problems. People who can fund, people who can advocate, people who can do a skills recognition, people who can, employ someone, or conduct important research that informs all the other stakeholders. We all need to collaborate as and where we get an opportunity and do whatever good we can do in this space as well.
Thank you. Now, Abul, are there any final comments you'd like to make?
Just one very quick one. We did spend a lot of time talking about doctors.
Yeah.
Yet, by far, the biggest shortages we have, by a long, long way, are construction trades workers, carpenters, plumbers, etc. Far bigger shortages in that area than there are in the health area. We are much better at attracting doctors and nurses than we are at attracting carpenters, plumbers, bricklayers, etc. And we struggle to attract them through the migration system. And I think that's probably the area that probably needs the most research, not doctors. Forgive me for I'm not against doctors, but that's not where we need the research.
Quite okay. No offense taken.
Yeah, fine. Thank you. Well, that's been a fascinating and great discussion over the last 90 minutes. Can you thank all our panelists for their contribution?